All right, guys, this is Mr. Naimatsu. We're coming with a screencast about the overview of the Renaissance and specifically why Italy. So here's the Renaissance. The Renaissance, there's no exact time period, but generally it's thought of occurring between the mid 14th and early 17th century. Most historians usually put the year 1450 to the year 1650 as the exact deadline, as the exact dates. So notice that although we're going to end the Renaissance actually continues throughout what we call the New Monarchs, the Age of New Monarchs, the Protestant Reformation, and actually getting close to the Wars of Religion. So this is a movement that's going to be happening for our next 3 or 4 units. However, we're just going to cover it for 1 unit, and with the assumption that you understand that it keeps on going on. It began in Italy. We're going to talk about that a little bit more. And then it moved into Northern Europe, specifically Germany. Germany is going to be the home to the printing press that we're going to learn about later. Also Netherlands and eventually England. But Germany is really going to be the heart of what we call the Northern Renaissance. So we have the Italian Renaissance and the Northern Renaissance, and they both have very unique characteristics. And we'll describe about that a little bit later in this unit. It is considered the beginning of modern Europe. I know last night for homework you had the words humanism, secularism, individualism, and as you're writing them down with your personal examples, you probably said, this kind of sounds like how Europeans maybe were thinking like Americans, that maybe through our hard work we can become better, whether that be individualism, humanism, or the idea that one's religion shouldn't limit who they are and the capabilities they have, such as the freedom of religion and our First Amendment and our secular mode of government, which separates church and state. So this is a reason why the Renaissance is considered the beginning of modern Europe, because this is where they start acting a little bit more what we consider modern Americans and modern Europeans. There is definitely a change. It was seen as a change in human thought and activity. Again, this is why it's considered the beginning of modern Europe. Politically, there will be some changes. You're going to have a man called Machiavelli. Culturally, the Renaissance is going to affect all segments of society. It's going to empower the individual, whether it be the individual artist or the individual Christian who is by himself learning how to worship God in a more rightful light. So just as a heads up, it kind of affects everything. We've already talked about some economic effects. Obviously, intellectual and scientific are huge. One of the huge thinkers is Leonardo da Vinci, a man that was known as being a Renaissance man. He was an inventor. He was an architect. He was a sculptor, which means he carved things out of stone. And he was I think I already said it, but artist as well. So right now, I think the Balboa Museum has something on Da Vinci, which is kind of interesting. So kind of gives you an idea of how this movement affected intellectual and scientific changes as well. So the big question, and I kind of spoke about this in my class yesterday, I don't know if Mr. Procopio got this, but is why does this begin in Italy? Well, first of all, it had the ruins of Roman civilization, reminding Italians of what we call the classical age. When you hear the word classics, or they hear the words antiquities, or like I said, classical, what they're talking about is the ancient civilizations of Greece and Rome. Greece and Rome was considered a very high point of human civilization. That's why it's studied so much, and that's why we know about things like the Roman Empire and the Greek Empire. They had unique forms of democracy. They had basic ways of bringing water to their people. It seemed like people had been largely educated. And then after the fall specifically of Rome around the 300, 400 AD, till about 1450, when the Renaissance began, is about 1,000 years of what's called the Dark Ages. And those Dark Ages is a time of what we call violence. We kind of talked about the violent past that Europe was going through with the 100 Years' War, the Black Death. And so when they come out of this violent part, it's called known as the Renaissance. And when they look at this Renaissance, they begin looking at the civilizations of Rome and Greece. Now, Rome is a city, and it was where the civilization is inside of Italy. So it makes sense that the Italians basically had a library full of Roman stuff, a museum of Roman stuff, to remind themselves of how Rome was and to kind of like model their new society based off of Roman society. The fall of Constantinople to the Ottoman Turks in 1453 brought many Greek scholars to Italy. I'm going to go ahead and zoom this out real quick, and I'm going to go ahead and show you a map like I kind of showed my class to kind of remind them. But if you were to look at a European map, give me one more second here, and you were going to take a look at this map, you will notice that here is Italy, and here's Rome again, where they're the library. But how did all these Greek scholars go over to Rome? Well, first of all, they're not separated by too much, so they used a boat basically to travel. But the big thing was this: the Ottoman Turks, which was a kind of a Muslim group, was coming out of this area and expanding into Turkey and expanding even further. And actually, during this time, they're going to start expanding all the way up to Hungary. Um, but as they started expanding from Turkey, they ran to what's called Istanbul today. Back in these times in 1450, it was called Constantinople. It's the same city, but in between, there's actually a waterway here. So this is a very, very important area because, first of all, it cuts off basically Europe from what we call Asia Minor. Also, this is a big trading route. When the Ottoman Turks began taking over Constantinople, the Greeks go, "Oh my goodness, these Turks are coming. They are Islamic in their religion. We are Greek Orthodox Christian. We've had a history of fighting these guys in the past, and basically all these guys began taking their stuff and running across the sea, Mediterranean Sea, to Italy, right here, and going into Rome. So this is a basic reason why not only Roman things were found in Italy, but why Greek scholars, with all of their museums and all their libraries of what Greek culture was, brought their stuff over to Rome. So going back over here into this. So it makes sense that, oops, sorry, we started from the beginning. Let me fly through this. But it makes sense that in 1453 that the Ottoman Turks, in 1453, that many of these Greek ideas were brought to Italy. Italy opened up trade with the high civilizations of the Eastern Mediterranean areas, interacting with the Byzantine and Muslim traders. So there is some more interaction with more ideas. This is going to definitely change shipbuilding, which is going to allow Christopher Columbus later to go ahead and build better, stronger, faster ships that are going to be able to go across the world. So there's some of this interaction that's happening between what we call the Middle East. Lastly, Italy is very wealthy at this time. Again, going back, sorry that we have to do this, but going back, remember that Europe as they know it is basically this area, and trade is done basically by ships. And obviously, the biggest way of trading in Europe would be through the Mediterranean Sea. If you did go to the Atlantic Ocean, you were staying pretty close to the coast. So most goods actually came from India and China. We know this as the Silk Road that had spices and silks. It would travel through the Middle East, and after going through the Middle East, it would drop off over here, and here it would be run by ships, and the ships would take it usually over to Italy, and then Italy would basically trade it with all these other countries. And this is how things from India and China over here got over to Germany. Well, because Italy has this big boot that's in the middle of the ocean, they were seen as like the big traders. I mean, a lot of people would go ahead and drop their goods off here so that they can be shipped further. So for that reason alone, they became very wealthy. You're going to learn in this class, the more trade you have, the wealthier it become. And that's what happened in Italy. Well, they had so much wealth that they could afford to actually support artists. And that's what this word right here means, patronage. Patronage, let me go ahead and get to it, means the ability of very wealthy people to actually pay artists to build art for them, whether it be art of the Jesus Christ, Lord and Savior, who's going to help them reach heaven, or whether it be art about my family photo and basically a family portrait. Lastly, the freedom of the Italian city-states. Italy at this time was not unified. If you look at on the TAC website, the European map of 1450, you will notice that Italy is very much divided, excuse me. So these different city-states actually competed, kind of like different cities do, like with their little league teams, or like schools do with their high school teams. They want to show pride, they want to show they're the best, they want to show they have the best mascot, so they began buying the best artists. They would basically say, Leonardo da Vinci, I'll give you this much, and then somebody else would say, well, I'm from this Italian city-state from, let's say, Florence, I want you to do this. And then somebody would hear, oh my gosh, I heard Leonardo da Vinci is not that good at all. Actually, the best artist is Michelangelo. And suddenly Michelangelo was being bought and supported by many, many, many wealthy, what we call merchants. And many of the merchants were actually the leaders of these, what we call city-states, these small cities that had their own individual countries within them. And so they competed against each other to have the best art and the best artists. And we know that through competition, usually you're going to get a better product. And that's what happened in Italy with the Renaissance. So the characteristics of the Renaissance, these are them: Classicism, Secularism, Individualism, Humanism, Rationalism, and Realism. I'm not going to go ahead and read every single one. So if you want to pause after each one of these and write some notes on classicism, that's cool. But basically, I'm just going to talk about what's the most important part. So classicism is, again, belief in the classical age. If you're thinking the classical age is Greece and Rome, you're correct, and we can understand why this happened in Europe. One kind of important thing that you want to know is that a lot of Renaissance scholars were focused a lot on writing. It's not just art, it's actually art and literature. And a lot of the Renaissance scholars focused on translating a lot of the classical documents that were written in Greek, Rome, or even Latin and turn it into vernacular languages. Vernacular languages are like languages that we know today, like English, French, Spanish, Italian, Dutch, Portuguese, these type of things. And we're going to talk a little bit more about vernacular languages later. Secularism, you guys know. One thing I want to talk about as you guys read this is secular does not mean I don't like God and I'm an atheist. Secular just means, you know what? Sorry when I say his, because that's what we attribute God to, but his actions and his beliefs not necessarily affect everyday life. So God does not affect me on a day-to-day level, but he is very important in my life. None of these people would call themselves outright atheists. In fact, probably if you called yourself an atheist out during this time, you would probably beheaded or massacred by most people. Definitely if the church found out about it, you'd be in some major trouble. So there was no really kind of idea of atheism at this time, but this secular attitude, this attitude that God does not have complete control of my life, he does not have complete control of my destiny, is kind of an attitude that begins popping up during this time. We have individualism. The important part is that an individual, individualism was kind of glorifying the individual man, the individual person, rather than seeing them as a part of a group. Rather than you being Brandon, the teacher, and only being known as the teacher, you know myself as Brandon, the social science teacher, that has unique emotions, unique experiences, unique histories that make me who I am. You can see this also here, that Renaissance artists actually began signing. Oops, sorry about that. But right here, Renaissance artists began signing their work, taking credit for that. Before then, artists wouldn't even sign their work. And most art was actually created by the church to create little pictures so that you could tell the story of Jesus Christ. And so most artists would actually only have pictures of angels, the story of the Bible, and that's pretty much it. They wouldn't have pictures of important people during that time. They wouldn't have pictures of themselves. They wouldn't have pictures of nature at all. It would be primarily religious in nature, and they wouldn't take any credit because guess what? My Jesus Christ kind of looks like my next door neighbor church's Jesus Christ, and guess what? We're all paintings of Jesus Christ, so who cares? I'm not this really famous artist. Individual increases the chance for people to become more famous and take credit for their work. One thing that you might want to take a note on, this is a man that we're going to talk about later, is not only did they talk about art and literature, they began focusing on manners. During this time, I talked to my class that life was very, very hard. And there probably wasn't any time for manners. And most people are living only to their 30s. I think men are only about 5'1" to 5'2". Women are only about 4'10" in height. The reason is because they have such miserable lives. They're working so hard, and they're not getting enough really good food that they're not actually living and growing up to their full potential. So the Renaissance kind of changes that with increased wealth. And one thing they began saying is, instead of acting like a bunch of animals, we're humans, so maybe we should have some etiquette. They start saying, hey, you know what? You shouldn't just spit on the table, because during this time, if you want to spit on the table, I guess you could. Hey, you know what? You should probably know a little bit more about things. And this is called education and knowledge. So we're going to come to Castiglione's work, and his work was a courtier, but he's talking about how to act, what we call table manners today. And I guess they didn't really have those, especially for the common man. And it's very doubtful that the common man had any type of what we call table manners, like you shouldn't spit, you should use a napkin, you shouldn't belch. And these, and when belch, I mean burping. These are kind of some of the things that Castiglione actually is talking about in his book for like the first time, that all people should not do these things. So it's kind of interesting. Humanism, probably one of the most important ideas. I would say this: humanists basically focus on that their human abilities can create human achievement that they should be proud of. This isn't coming from God. This isn't coming just because I'm a peasant, but as a human, I can understand and think through this world and shape my own destiny. Okay, so I'll let you guys go ahead and think about this or write any of these things about humanism that you'd like. And here we go. Petrarch is the father of humanism. He labeled the other one, the Dark Ages, that time period from the fall of the Roman Empire on the 400 AD all the way up to into the Renaissance, 1450. Okay. Rationalism means reason. There was this new idea that there was a certain amount of knowledge that can be accessed that would reduce one's superstition. And so, they basically began using reason and using education to inform their decisions. All right, I'll go back. There, now you can hit pause so you can take your notes. Sorry about that. All right. Next one, realism. Especially in art, not so much in the literature, but definitely in the art, there is a more of an effort to show people as being realistic. You can see this in the Mona Lisa. The Mona Lisa is a very typical. The reason why she's so famous is because, or the reason the painting is so famous, because she was so not famous. Many people who are famous and who had a lot of money commissioned arts. But in this case, Leonardo da Vinci, through the Mona Lisa, basically looked at a normal peasant girl in a normal peasant setting. If you look at the background of the Mona Lisa, it has a lot of natural landscape. So that's what we call realism, basically to portray life realistically as it is, not glorified as a certain way or done like inside of a magazine or a TV commercial, but how life is how it is. So there you go. I'll let you record those notes. Sorry, went to batch. Do that again. ... All right, hit pause. Now you can take your notes. All right, guys. Well, hopefully that gives you an overview of the Renaissance. The goal of this screencast was to tell you why it happened in Italy, number one, and number two, give you some understanding of the basic characteristics and beliefs of the Renaissance. So hopefully we took care of that. If you had any questions right now, you should have written down those questions, and hopefully you bring those up in class to Mr. Procopio or myself, and so that we can have an awesome class and continue our learning about the Renaissance. All right, till next time, have a good rebirth.